All right, thank you, Anna. Most of you are probably aware that our theme for this semester is women and politics. And one of the things we decided to do as we thought about this theme was to invite some presenters who could address some of these issues in a more local context. And we're very happy to have representatives of Mormon Women for Ethical Government here. On the table at the back, we'll see you have this very informative flyer. If you're interested in the organization, you want to know more, of course, you'll listen to what we're saying, they'll say today, but also you can pick one of those up on your way out. Now, what we're going to do, how we'll proceed is I will introduce our three panelists today. They will each present some brief remarks, and then following that, they'll take questions from you. I will ask you, as we normally do, because this is being filmed, right? We're going to ask you if you have a question to please come up here to the microphone, tell us your name and what you're studying, and that way your question as well as the response will be filmed, and the audio portion will also be available to all those who want to watch it online. Okay. We will first hear from Diana Bate Hardy. She received a bachelor's degree in English and then went to BYU Law School, both from BYU. Some of her most formative law school experiences included volunteering for the International Center for Law and Religion, an externship at Catholic Community Services, where she assisted refugees from all over the world, and a summer clerkship with the Salt Lake City Immigration Court. So after law school, she's practiced civil litigation at a local firm and worked as a law school admissions specialist for BYU Law School before taking a break to raise her young daughter. She's the co-founder and interim executive director of Mormon Women for Ethical Government. Following Diana, we'll hear from Catherine Eslinger. She earned a BA in English and an MA in teaching English to speakers of other languages from BYU. She's taught English to adults in the United States and China. She's a full-time parent of 4 young children and is interested especially in issues that impact the community, like environmental quality and healthcare access. And she's co-leader of the Utah chapter of Mormon Women for Ethical Government and is also the organization's voter engagement specialist. Following Catherine, we'll then hear from Jennifer Walker Thomas, who studied at BYU also, where she received bachelor's degree in art history and Italian, then went on to do graduate work in art history at the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU, one of the great graduate schools, which is where I did my graduate work. While there, she worked as a consultant for underperforming schools in the New York City public school system. After a move to Boston, she's worked in gift fundraising for Massachusetts General Hospital, and following the birth of her 4 boys, became a full-time parent, but has been involved in many community and church things. Just a short list here: volunteering for campaigns, acting as PTA president, sitting on town policy committees, and currently she's an elected member of her town government. So here's someone clearly engaged. And she's really interested in how government and policies of government impact citizens. And she wants, anyway, she is currently the director of the non-partisan route and chair of the board of directors for Mormon Women for Ethical Government. So please join me in welcoming all 3 of our panelists, and then we'll invite Diana to come forward.
Thank you so much for having us today. Just before we start, I'm so happy to see so many of you here, but I would kind of like to know how many of you are already familiar with our organization, by raise of hand. Okay, great. And how many of you are members? Yay, okay. Well, we invite the rest of you to join after this presentation. You can find information on our website at mweg.org. So I am really excited to be here, but I have to say that if anyone would have told me even 2 years ago that I would be speaking on a panel about women in politics, I would have laughed. This is not at all where I expected to be today. And that's very much kind of how things have gone for me with Mormon Women for Ethical Government. I just want to tell you just a little bit about how I got involved. The organization was created in January of 2017, just a couple of days immediately following the initial travel ban. And our founders, who are all published and award-winning authors, some children's book authors, had a group of women together who, it was a writing group, and they reached out to each other and said, you know, they had been really working with refugees in their communities after I was a stranger, and they were just, frankly, appalled. and they reached out to each other and said, we have to do something about this. What are we going to do? And so they took it off their writing group and said, let's just create a Facebook group, just a secret Facebook group that we can just collaborate on, and we'll just figure out how we can respond. And within weeks, there were thousands of women. And so we've spent the last 2 years trying to build and formalize our organization that really just started as a Facebook group of women, primarily LDS, or women who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who wanted to be doing something and felt compelled to act. And my background was that while I was in law school, I did a legal externship for Catholic Community Services, where I did immigration law for refugees from all over the world. And it really opened my eyes and helped me kind of see how things were working from the legal side of things. And then the following summer, I did an externship with the Salt Lake Immigration Court, and it really opened my eyes as to how things work in the immigration system. But during both of those clerkships, I cried all the way home from work every day. And I realized that it maybe wasn't the best job for me for everyday work, because it just crept into my family life and my home life, and I had a really hard time separating myself from the trauma that I was seeing every day in these positions. And so I took a different path. I went into civil litigation. I loved civil litigation, but I always have had this interest in immigration law. And what I have said for years is that I know just enough about immigration to be dangerous, right? That I wouldn't dare represent someone in court because I heard the immigration judges ream out a couple of attorneys who didn't know what they were doing and were there trying to help, and it was a disaster. And so I have always had this passion, but that's kind of how I thought about it, was I know just enough to be dangerous. And then when I was introduced to Mormon Women for Ethical Government, part of what we were advocating for was more ethical immigration policy. And that was where my little bit of knowledge came in really handy. And I realized that these other women that were working together had even less knowledge about immigration, and so I just sort of felt compelled to throw my hat in the ring and say, you know, I do know a little bit about this, I can help. And looking back, the way that I would describe it now is not that I know just enough to be dangerous, but that I know just enough to keep me humble and just enough to help me be inspired, to know what questions to ask, to know where to go from here. And so I bring that up because what has snowballed from there has been not at all what I would have expected, but it has taken me to Capitol Hill last February, sharing a document that I and a couple of colleagues put together on the 15 declarations, MWEG's 15 declarations for ethical immigration policy. And then we created a proposal, a citizen's proposal for fair and ethical comprehensive immigration reform. And we collaborated with law professors at BYU who are members of our organization. We collaborated with experts in the legal field. We've collaborated with my old colleague at Catholic Community Services who does immigration law for refugees. And we've collaborated with various individuals that I and others have met along the way on our various paths, not to MWEG, but wherever else we were going. And it has been amazing to see how that has happened. And time again, what I have realized is that God really prepares us. And we can't always predict the ways, but all the experiences that we have, all the opportunities that we're given are preparing us for something specific that we can do to make the world better. And that it's not, I mean, it sounds kind of Pollyanna to talk like that sometimes, especially when you go to Capitol Hill, because we didn't know what we were doing. It was I and two of my colleagues who were on the immigration committee, and we were just learning as we went, but we felt compelled and we felt inspired, and first and foremost, we were just praying for inspiration and guidance. And time again, we would receive it. And we could tell in these meetings that we weren't doing things the way that everyone else does them. And sometimes we even felt a little foolish, but interestingly enough, it sort of played in our favor on many instances because we weren't playing the game like everyone else, right? And so I just have a couple more minutes, but I want to just share one experience and talk about our principles of peacemaking, because these tie together, and I want to explain how it all kind of fits together. Early on, right at the very beginning, we decided that we wanted to be guided by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s principles of nonviolence. And his writings and his teachings were really fundamental to the culture that we were trying to create. And then a few months in, we realized that we needed to adjust them a little bit. We needed to come up with our own principles of peacemaking that fit specifically with our organization. And so we wrote 6 principles of peacemaking, and you can find them on the back of these information sheets. But these are the 6 principles of peacemaking. Peacemaking is proactive and courageous. Peacemaking seeks to unify instead of divide. Peacemaking demands great tolerance for people and none for injustice. Peacemaking views human suffering as sacred. Peacemaking chooses love instead of hate. And finally, peacemaking believes that ultimate peace is not only possible, but sure. And those are our guiding principles that we encourage our members to adopt and internalize and always guide their actions. And so that's one thing that we have really stayed true to in our discussion groups. We have moderators that keep everyone abiding by those principles of peacemaking. And, you know, we're bold. We're bold in calling out injustice, but we do it without berating the individual. And it's been an important part of who we are. And when we went to Capitol Hill, one of the meetings that we were able to have was with former Senator Orrin Hatch, who had agreed to meet with us and actually was kind enough to let us meet in his office at the Capitol. And it was amazing. It was a wonderful opportunity. We got to talk to him about our declarations and our proposal. And as we sat across the table with him and just 2 of his staffers, he said to us, "You know why you have this meeting today, right?" And we said, "Well, not exactly." And he said, "It's because we know what we'll get from you. We know that when we engage with you, we will be treated with civility. And we know what to expect. And we know that you're never going to engage in a way that would, bring shame or trouble to us." And I thought that was so interesting, specifically because we had just recently published an op-ed calling him out. I mean, he wasn't at all saying that we go easy on him or that he knows that we're just going to agree with him. But even though we had just done that in a very public way, he trusted us. He trusted us, and that one thing got us in the door when other organizations are not allowed in the door because they have different strategies, different techniques that don't follow those same principles and guidelines. And so I want to make sure there's time for my colleagues, but I do just want to just say one more thing, and that is that I spent a lot of time at the very beginning, even before I got engaged in a leadership position, asking and saying to myself, why me? Why me? I don't have the expertise on this. And even early on in immigration, I would think, I would read the news and I would want to scream and say, that isn't how it works. But I didn't. I just thought, well, certainly there are so many other people who have more experience than I do. And eventually God told me really clearly to stop asking why me in a kind of a humiliating way, but that's a story for a different day. But as soon as I stopped asking why me, I received a lot of opportunities and a lot of help. And things have gone not like I imagined, but I have received so many opportunities that I just never would have seen coming. And I just want to encourage all of you today to think about whether you're asking those same questions. Why me? And change your focus. Just start asking, why not me? Because each one of you is having experiences that are valuable, that give you a perspective that is needed. And what we're seeing now more than ever is that citizens need to speak up. It's time. And women in particular need to be willing to be bold and to raise your voices. So please join us. MWEG is a great place where you can, put your foot in the water and get some really great mentorship and help in doing that. But we need you, and the world needs you. So please be bold. Okay, I'll turn the time over to Catherine.
Well, I'm sort of an unlikely U.S. activist, I suppose. I come from a bicultural family. My mother's American, my father's Canadian, and I was raised in Canada. And I always feel a little sheepish about that, but we are all needed here in making our world a better place. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what we've done in Utah, in the Utah chapter. The Utah chapter is particularly active because we have so many people to work with, and we have a lot of energy and strength. One of our founders, who was going to be here today, but she's having a well-deserved trip to Africa, is Charlene Mullins-Glenn, and she related an experience where she felt that God was speaking to her and telling her that MWEG was a way in which God would school his daughters. And we can think about all of the ways that MWEG can help each of us grow. When I think of the opportunities that I've had through MWEG, and then the opportunities that Diana mentioned, that all of us have had to have new experiences, to grow, to become more engaged in our communities. This, I think for many of us, maybe we wanted to become involved in something in the past, maybe we observed some kind of less than ideal situation in our community, but felt a little uncomfortable attending, say, a rally or attending a vigil, maybe not considering ourselves that kind of person. But I hope that MWEG can be, for many of us, can be sort of an easy on-ramp to becoming the kind of person who is involved, who is aware of what happens in the community. One of the big things that we do is we educate our members. We educate one another by sharing quality resources, becoming aware of the issues that are happening in the state, in our cities, and also at the federal level. And as we learn about those, we can determine as a group and individually, what are the actions that we want to take in these regards? And then maybe MWEG doesn't take an official action, but maybe individuals in many cases are led to the action that they've determined that they want to take. So for instance, we've held our own vigils and rallies, and we've attended those that have been held by other organizations that we've partnered with. And we've had large numbers of our members who would attend a rally or a vigil for the first time ever. And it's really exciting to be able to participate in speaking out and also, but knowing that when you go to a rally that I like to think that our MWEG rallies are sort of, kind of what you're going to get a little bit. We of course, we welcome a variety of speakers from the community, from people who are affected by, say, immigration policy. We had a big vigil regarding the separation of children from their families, and we invited a lot of immigrant members of our community to speak about their experiences and what they had observed and felt. But we also urged everyone who attended that this was an opportunity to be peaceful and to meet and gather in a peaceful way. So we hope that our MWEG gatherings are something where you have an opportunity to speak out, but it is slightly less intimidating for those of us who are just getting started in community engagement. We've also been really involved in voter registration. With some partners like Voterize in Utah and some other groups here in Utah, we helped to register about 10,000 new voters prior to the 2018 midterm election. And we had a lot of our members come and participate in those registration drives. We had many members who thought about their child's high school, where they could pre-register 16 and 17-year-olds, and we went at lunch times and we pre-registered a lot of youth, a lot of those young people, and give them an opportunity to get registered right away so they can jump right in when they are eligible to actually vote. And so that was so exciting, and we had so much energy related to feeling like we can actually do something. We can make an impact. I think a lot of times we feel like, well, what I do doesn't matter in my own little corner of my political world. But when you go out and you register people to vote, and you have a stack of 20 voter registration forms that you've completed at the end of a 2-hour shift, you know you've really done something positive to help our community, because more engagement is always better. We've also hosted several events called Rethink Tanks, where we've partnered with an organization called Rethink International, where thought leaders from different sides of an issue come together and share perspectives, and then everyone is welcome to share their ideas. It's a way to discuss hot topics in a really peaceful way. And I've attended 2 of those, and they've been really enlightening moments of gaining a perspective that I had not had before, and they've been really positively viewed. And we plan to host more of those, and so we welcome you to watch our announcements about those on our media platforms. We've also visited a lot of our members of Congress offices as small groups, as larger groups, to discuss immigration, to discuss other issues that are salient to us. And this is something I had never done before until I became part of MWAG. And it's been very exciting to have a sit-down meeting with a representative, if you're fortunate enough to get one of those, and to be able to discuss a specific issue. Even just dropping by, we've taken some letters and statements to our members of Congress, and it's also really fantastic to be able to participate in that way, and so that they know who you are, you know who they are. I love when I call and I say, this is Catherine Eslinger from Vineyard, my zip code is 84059, and I'd like to leave a message for Representative Curtis. And they say, oh, Catherine, okay, well, we have your information here on file. We can send you an email response to Representative Curtis has written an op-ed about this recently. You can read it, and so they, it's wonderful when they know who you are, and that you are out there and you're watching, you're listening, and you want to engage with them in a peaceful and constructive way. We have hosted some candidate forums, which is really exciting. There was one state House race in Utah where there had not been a debate or a candidate forum for 18 years. And so we hosted one where there were 2 candidates in that race. We invited both of the candidates to come, and there were questions from the audience. There were questions submitted in advance that had been checked for duplication and checked for relevance. And so we had a moderator who helped to get this conversation in that particular state House district going, and it was a really positive experience. We also held one in District 3 here in our federal House district, which was another really wonderful experience. To be able to engage, sometimes I think we overlook some of those lower level races where we can truly have an impact. The State House, the State Senate, your City Council, all of those things where we can get involved, we can pay attention and listen to what's happening, and we can make an impact, make a greater impact. Because I think a lot of us are disengaged from those in particular. We've had a number of women run for office in our group. Now we're still such a young group, a new group, that I don't know that we can really take credit for those women. They've probably had the seed of running for office in their hearts for a long time, but I do hope that in the future we can have many, many more women who are feeling like they have enough. Well, I know that those women have so much to share, so much to give to their community, that they feel the confidence to know that it's worth it to run, and it's a hard road, but it is worth it, and it is worth the contribution. And that's something we really want to invest in the future, in encouraging our fine women of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to participate in local, state, federal politics more. So when I went to visit a woman who had just moved into my ward, and I took her a loaf of bread. How stereotypical is that, right? I baked a loaf of bread, and I took it over to her it was September, they had just moved in, and I also had some voter registration forms. So I took it over to her house, and I said, "Welcome to the neighborhood. My name is Catherine. I live just down the street. I see you just moved in. Here's a loaf of bread. My children are many of the same ages as your children. And here are some voter registration forms." And she said, "Oh, my husband can do that. I'm Canadian." And I said, "Oh, I'm Canadian too. But I'm a dual citizen." And she said, "I haven't gotten my citizenship because I just don't. The only thing I can't do is vote. And that's not important anyway." Well, that was a really... That was how do I recover from that, right? The gracious neighbor. "Oh, yes, voting, yes." So I think there is, you here in this room are outliers because you're here. You are participating in an international, the Kennedy Center's really international leaning, and thinking about the world. Many people, perhaps in my demographic, especially the suburban Mormon mom, are not really paying that much attention to what's going on in politics. Dare I say, everything is political. Our air quality, the water quality, education, who's teaching in your school, what is the curriculum that's being taught, what are the sentences for minor crimes, major crimes? All of these things are political. Transportation, it's all political. And to say that it doesn't matter whether we vote or not, whether we participate or not, is to blind ourselves to what is happening in our world. And while it is sort of difficult to balance all of the tasks that we have, family caregiving, job, household tasks, our health needs, as well as being aware of our community, these are things that we are needed for, women are needed for. And also, I would like to say that MWEG is not just me, it's not Diana, it's not Jennifer, it's everyone who participates in MWEG. You can all be MWEG as well. And we need you, and our communities need you as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears a tiny bit. I'm interested to hear, you guys have heard a talk on politics, women who are active in politics and actively engaging, and you haven't heard two words mentioned once. Anyone guess what they were? Republican or Democrat? Nor do I think it would be possible for either of you to guess how either of those women politically identify based simply on the things that they've said. And that's something that I want to address a little bit right now that I think is sort of unique to Mormon Women for Ethical Government. We are a nonpartisan organization dedicated to engaging peacefully, proactively, with a basis in faith. Those last three are beautiful and noble attributes, right? Peaceful, faithful, proactive. They speak to really good things. Nonpartisanship is sort of the ugly stepsister. It's a little bit less attractive. It tends to kind of get ignored and bypassed, even sometimes in our own planning. But it's sort of the ugly stepchild that if you don't feed, like the Department of Social Services comes after you, so you take care of it because you have to. But I want to argue that we should think about that really, really differently. Because partisanship in our current form is really the salt that gets sown in the ground that is the fertile soil where those other three things grow. If we don't address partisanship directly, and if we don't figure out how we're going to manage it, both organizationally and nationally, it becomes a barrier to us growing all of the good things that are very important to us. So I want to read just a couple of statistics to kind of frame this. Partisanship is at an all-time high in America. None of this is news to any of you. But the Pew Research Center reported that in 2014, so this was at the height of kind of Obama being president, that 92% of Republicans identified ideologically to the right of the median Democrat, and 94% of Democrats identified ideologically to the left of the median Republican. And that might sound normal to you. It's not. It's not at all normal for the way American politics have worked for about the last 30 years. So people identified as Republicans or Democrats, but ideologically, they swam a lot more in the middle. So you would find that there was a huge amount of ideological overlap in those spaces of people identifying as Republicans or Democrats. Another thing that's really important to realize is that the views of the opposition have also risen in intensity. Several years ago, Pew reported that 36%, this doesn't sound like a huge number, but when we talk about what it means, it's a little terrifying. 30% of Republicans saw Democrats, individual Democrats, not the party, but individual Democrats as a threat to the nation's well-being. Now, that was a few years ago. Again, we had a Democratic president. My guess is if you took that poll today, you would find that many Republicans feel the same way, or Democrats feel the same way about Republicans. And I want you to think about that for a minute. How do you treat someone who you see as an existential threat to your national well-being? It sort of brings out anxiety, it brings out anger, it brings out intense emotions that are basically not productive. So the results of that kind of are predictable. We stop having a baseline view of seeing members of the other party as well-intentioned. There's statistical proof that there is a marked decrease in your willingness to dialogue or compromise. And often then dialoguing with members of the other side is seen as traitorous or sort of denying your own cause. There's a self-reported desire that is actually at its highest point among the American citizenry right now to avoid all contact with and conversation with people who identify differently from you politically. So that's huge. That means we just have stopped talking to each other. And the final thing is that there's a marked increase in ideological polarization, which is actually quite different than political polarization, which means that the ideological groups have really cemented what they think and identified specifically with certain parties. So it doesn't really take any time for me, and I'm not going to even take the time to do it, to point out the ways that this is all really inimical to democratic growth, function, and dialogue. What I want to do is shift a little bit and talk about the concept of total war. All of you are political science. You're interested in politics. Maybe some of you are interested in history. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the concept of total war, but that's a new concept of war that emerged in the 20th century, specifically in relationship to World War II. And I'm going to read you a very specific definition so you know what I'm talking about. Total war is warfare that includes any and all civilian-associated resources and infrastructure as legitimate military targets. It mobilizes all of the resources of society to fight the war and gives priority to warfare over non-combatant needs. The Oxford dictionaries define total war as a war that is unrestricted in terms of the weapons used, the territory or combatants involved, or the objectives pursued, especially one in which the laws of war are disregarded. If you switch that out and take war and put in politics, it actually is a really good descriptor of the way we are engaging in politics today. We have moved from just a sort of a gentleman's, back in the day, agreement of how we were going to do politics to total war. It's scorched earth. The objective is winning, the objective is power, and it doesn't really matter who gets harmed in the process. I thought this was super interesting when it said, it doesn't matter, it mobilizes all the resources of the society and gives priority to warfare over non-combatant needs. Shut down anyone, right? So we prioritize the warfare over the actual legitimate function of government and the needs of all hundreds of millions of people that government serves. So I really would argue, are living through a period of total political war. Both parties have weaponized our institutions, our schools, our civic spaces, and even, incredibly sadly, our religions. So what does that have to do with Mormon Women for Ethical Government? A lot. I think it's really important for us to start thinking, if we live in this environment where we are engaged in total political war, we have to start thinking about how we want to accomplish the goals that used to be the goals of politics, but now politics goals are arguably just fighting, bickering, retaining power, achieving ground. So if we sit down and think as citizens, what were the original goals of politics? And they're different for all of us, whether they're happiness, whether they're wealth, whether they are freedom. We have to start thinking as citizens about ways that we are going to engage in achieving those things outside of traditional political parties. Because if traditional political parties are only mobilized for war and their leaders are the generals, then it's actually no longer their objective to help us as citizens get what we want. It's their objective to retain power. I don't know if that makes sense. So what Mormon Women for Ethical Government and spaces like it are providing is actually the only space that I think we're going to find for a while where we can actively engage in making peace. Generals are very rarely interested in their first priority as making peace. That's not what they're there for. That's not what they've been built to do. That's not what they've built their armies to accomplish. And so we have to mobilize a separate kind of group. I wouldn't say an army because I don't like that phrase, but a group and multiple groups that are interested in, through very peaceful and proactive means, accomplishing the ends that were traditionally the ends of government and returning to using government to accomplish those ends. So I just want to raise a few questions. We want to leave time for you guys to talk, so I'm going to close really quickly, but I'm going to raise a few questions that I want you to be thinking about and maybe asking us about that are in relationship to what we do. Because I really believe that what our objective is as Mormon Women for Ethical Government is they are objectives of peace. Like Diana spoke about, we've got these objectives that are listed of our principles of peacemaking, which means we are absolutely committed to achieving these objectives through peaceful means, not warlike means. So if you've got a group like us who wants to build a space that I've just talked about that is peaceful and is separate from traditional partisan warfare, how do you go about building something like that? How do you create a space where something like that can take root? You start by making that space peaceful and non-partisan. You carve it out as something like that. And for us, we've created a space that forces women in that space, by defining it as nonpartisan, to think and act differently about their political beliefs, their ideology, the way they hope to exercise power, the way they're going to engage with their representatives. So ask yourself, what would be the requirements for that kind of space? What kind of amazing things can you accomplish in a space like that when power has been taken out of the equation? What do the people in that space need to commit to in order to build it and maintain it? And then what do you do with that community? So I would argue, and it kind of dovetails nicely with what Diana and Catherine have both said, that the women of our particular faith are uniquely suited to build that kind of space. That there is something about the way that we have been enculturated, something deeply rooted in the gospel principles that we have ascribed to and the covenants that we have made, that lead us to be very particularly suited to building that kind of space. Now, it would be our hope that that space would not be exclusive to us and that we would extend that space to as many people as possible, but that we would use our talents and our specific religious perspective to build that space so that we can exist beyond partisanship. We have an idea of Zion. We have an idea of what it means to work in a collaborative community. We have an idea of what it means to leave behind the things of the world and focus on treating people as individuals, as children of God, and also as individuals based on their willingness to behave well rather than their tribal identity or any other thing that the world generally segregates them by. So as you think about it, I just want you to think about the ways that you, as men and women in this room, can exercise a lot of agency and activity in the field of politics, but do it in a way that does not involve going to war. To figure out how you are going to do it, what kind of spaces you are going to find, engage in, and even build that create peacemaking, possibility, and growth, rather than just trying to prosecute war. So I just encourage you all. I hope that we can be a vehicle for you. I hope many of you will join us. There's lots of space for lots of different things that we are doing. But if this isn't the group for you, you're at a very vibrant point in your life. Figure out what is the way that you're going to make a difference? What is the space that you're going to create where this proactive, peaceful, faithful, engaging work can happen? Because my guess is you all have a lot of inspiration and ways that you can do that. But it is going to require stepping out of the partisan frameworks that we've become very dependent on as we formulate our ideological principles and ideas. So I would invite you all to join us, and I hope you have some of the answers to the questions I just asked, and we'd love to hear your questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to invite our three speakers here to take seats up here at the table, and we'll invite you, again, to ask questions. Please come up here to the microphone, as I said. Please tell us your name, what you're studying, and then ask your question. We know that some of you will have to leave at about 10 minutes to the hour to make it to a class, but we'll proceed at least until the top of the hour for those who can stay.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Savage, and my majors are political science and sociology. My minors are development and women's studies. I was really intrigued by kind of the tension in your dialogue between the ideas of civility and engaging in a positive way and this concept of total war. And I know that's something your organization strives for, so I'm curious about more specifics of how you've navigated that tension, especially in reference to your the experience you mentioned with Orrin Hatch and the op-ed you published while maintaining civility.
Well, I just want to read you our third principle. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sure. Well, I'll just do it this way. I just want to read you the specific language of our third principle of peacemaking because it really informs the answer, but it's peacemaking demands great tolerance for people and none for injustice. And so we always start from a place of trying to center ourselves, right, from the standpoint of peacemaking, and then ask ourselves, are we responding out of anger to the individual or to the behavior? And focus specifically on what can we speak out about in a way that isn't attacking the character of the individual. And that's sometimes really hard. And it takes a lot of practice. And, it takes a lot of practice. And there are some politicians that their character is very much at the center of what is causing them to behave badly. And so it's difficult at times, but it comes back to Dr. King's principles of nonviolence and our really sincere belief that we have access to divine guidance and inspiration if we squelch that human nature aspect of how we respond. I hope that answers your question.
So I would just add one other space that, I'm going to pull this out. One other space that we've really tried to do that is this, Where We Were Born was this online discussion group. And it's very interesting to see women who have gotten used to responding in a certain way because of their particular ideological bent and responding in a certain way because that's how we do on social media, have to learn to modulate their voices in good ways and practice the principles of peacemaking in discussion with other women in the group. And it's a lot harder than you would think. But I have to say, the discussion group that is a closed group, but the discussion group for Mormon Women for Ethical Government on Facebook is one of the most delightful and interesting spaces left on Facebook because it's one of the few places where you actually have people who disagree coming together with their fundamental commitment is a desire to listen to each other and understand each other and learn. So that is, I think, the grassroots place we're practicing it.
One quick follow-up question, because I know there's one. Do you ever feel like your commitment to the higher principles of civility has caused you to be sidelined among those who are more committed to the idea of total war?
Well, I will say this. Yes. Yes, but there are doors that are open to those groups, and there are doors that are open to us. And we're exploring it, but honestly, again, it comes back to this deep-seated faith that we're doing what God wants us to do. And so we're kind of like, well, if it closes some doors, God will open other ones.
Yeah, and I would also state that we feel that it has opened possibilities for us we could not have envisioned. So we'll take that, right? If certain doors get closed, whatever, but we have seen it open doors that we would not have seen possible.
I think we may also occasionally be criticized for maybe not taking a strong enough stand, or, but you know, we can't win. You cannot win all the time.
Hi, my name is Paige Herman, and I'm a sociology major. And I was just wondering, your organization is focused on ethical government, so fighting against anything that is illegal or unethical, that's really broad. And so I was wondering, how do you decide where to focus your resources and your time?
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned, we started just as a Facebook group, so we've spent a lot of time over the last 2 years really refining that. And we actually have, on this sheet, you can see our advocacy guidelines and principles. So we are watchdogs and activists whose advocacy is guided by tenets of our faith that motivate us to, and then there are 3 basic things: safeguard and enhance the legitimacy of democratic institutions and principles, confront corruption and abuse of power and insist upon transparency and accountability, and ensure that laws, regulations, policies, and government actors protect the fundamental human rights and dignity of all God's children. So we've really kind of tried to narrow it, but still those categories are very broad. And there are, I mean, we have thousands of us, but that's not that many. So what I would say is we really operate on a model of individual empowerment. And like Catherine mentioned, sometimes it's an issue that we just don't have the bandwidth, or it doesn't fit squarely within those guidelines. But we always encourage our members to engage in whatever ways they feel inspired. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I'm Deborah. I'm studying political science. My question is, why did you decide to focus your organization on specifically Mormon women for ethical government instead of just women or people in general?
She's looking at me because she doesn't want to answer that question. It's not because I've got the answer. She doesn't want to answer it. So we have put, again, countless hours of thought into this. Part of it is, honestly, very specifically, because I just talked about the fact that I think there are things that Mormon women could specifically bring to the table. I also think that for whatever reason, it is not true of our foremothers, but Mormon women have often in the last 20, 30 years kind of stepped back from politics, disengaged, seen it as not their sphere, seen it as something distasteful. The world has moved on dramatically since then, and if you've got a group of people who are fundamentally predisposed to not liking contention, it's the last time for Mormon women to jump in to the discourse is this moment right now. And so we have tried to create a space that is representative of their needs and is representative of their skills. And it is our hope that as we do that, like I said, that we will be able to open that and broaden it. But the other final thing is we do have an institutional commitment to uphold and not traduce the doctrines and policies of the church. And so we have to state very clearly in our name, this is who we're for. If you want to join us and you're comfortable with that, by all means, but by just saying women, women of faith for ethical government, that doesn't, it felt a little dishonest, right? We couldn't hew to both of those things at once.
And I would add one more thing, that what we have to say is interesting because we're saying it as Mormon women, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There are media publications and politicians who have paid attention because we're speaking from that place of faith. And so it's interesting, it's challenging sometimes, it's not always exactly clear, but we see over and over that it matters. It's being paid attention to for that specific reason. So we'll see where it goes. Does that answer your question?
Hi, my name's Emma Glebe. I'm a neuroscience major minoring in political science and psychology. And my question was kind of similar to those that have already been shared. But how do you kind of move from a more informal dialogue, trying to help people become comfortable with bridging their own personal ideologies and kind of unpacking out of partisanship? And how do you kind of transition that from just Facebook, social media, into more overt action and safe space rallying?
I think you're.
Yeah, that's you, baby.
Okay, all right. Well, I think our greatest successes have been the face-to-face engagements. We have a conference coming up on March 30th here on BYU campus, which is also a wonderful place to come and meet and engage, and we're having excellent speakers. I was really excited about the speakers. I will say, when we decide to hold an event and we get people together, it is, these are fantastic events where we come together with people who share so many, not only our faith, but also our interest in whatever issue it is, whether it's immigration or voter access, yes, all of those issues. It's so exciting to gather. And we've found that those face-to-face meetings are really important. We've also partnered with some organizations to do lobbying up at the state capitol here in Utah, which is so exciting when you realize that any citizen can go and write a little note and have their legislator come out and talk to them. And that's kind of, the legislator has to come out and talk to you. So almost always. It's so exciting. I think we are not just a discussion group, but we do really try to do a lot of action. And we stay really busy. Yeah. We are busy.
And I would say the discussion group is sort of the gateway drug in a good way, right? It's your easy vegetable. It's the first vegetable you learn to eat. You know, it's the carrots you learn to eat before you learn to eat Brussels sprouts or whatever. Because I think for a lot of Mormon women, they need that space to start dialoguing, to find their voice, to learn how to explain things proactively and competently, and then they sort of self-select out. There are some that say, well, I found my voice, I figured out how I want to talk about this, I feel far more educated than I was 6 months ago, now I feel confident engaging. And then the organization also gives them the step to do that. So I think one thing that we've really put a priority on as a group is making sure that there were lots of different ways that women felt like they could belong. Some are crazy proactive and are on this 40 hours a week. And there are others who read Facebook pages and are learning things in a safe, I don't want to say safe space, but in a informative, non-aggressive space.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, my name is Tori Suggs. I'm studying human development and women's studies. My question is specifically about the think tanks or the rethink tanks that Kevin mentioned. How do you structure those in a way when you're inviting people that aren't already a part of this group so that they are constructive instead of contentious?
Well, Rethink International is a group that was run by Sweelang Panok, who and her mission is to set up the ground rules and the energy. Really, I mean, it sounds woo, right? But the seating is in a circle, in a small room that feels kind of cozy. She specifically chooses a cozy feeling space. Ground rules are laid down. There is visualization of being open to listening to new ideas, and then she invites specific thought leaders from maybe 3 or 4 perspectives that are across the spectrum of belief on a particular issue. And I think that the culture of that room essentially becomes, we are here to listen and learn, and everyone is equal and everyone can share and contribute. And our most recent one was about mental health and mental health access. And there were a lot of differing views, and there was disagreement. It was always very reasoned and respectful. And I came away thinking about mental health access in slightly different ways than I had before. Our previous one was about gun laws, which is really contentious. And also the same thing applied where we all bought into the atmosphere that had been created by Rethink International. So we can't necessarily take the credit for creating that. We understand when we enter the setup that's what the expectation is.
Can I just add too, it's really important to embrace this idea that civility doesn't just mean that we agree, right? Mm-hmm. We definitely disagree. Yeah. And
nor does it mean you're not ideological.
Absolutely. And we're not insisting that everyone leave the table on the same page. So part of it is just getting used to that tension and making space for it in a productive way.
Thanks.
We know you.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Dalton Bradford. I'm a Middle East Studies and Arabic major. And my question was, because I have a little bit of background knowledge when it comes to MWEG, I've heard comments being said, I guess in an online setting, where someone made the point that, I mean, we know that there's a temple recommend question that asks specifically, do you affiliate with any groups that do not adhere to the tenets of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Something along those lines. And maybe it's been brought up again since the name has remained Mormon Women for that ethical government, but what would you respond to that claim? Why do you think people might feel that way within the group?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Because so our name is about 2 years old, and when President Nelson, first the church issued their new style guide, and then of course President Nelson followed it up in General Conference, talking about the name of the church. And we spent months. Yeah, I know you know. Dalton's mom is one of our founders, so I know you know how much time was given to that decision of whether or not we should change our name. And I can say, I mean, Jen can say this too. We prayed. We went to the temple. We consulted with each other for many, many months trying to decide. And ultimately, we felt, this is maybe a longer answer than I can give in just 1 minute, but one of the reasons that we decided to keep our name was that we're not the church. We're not the church itself. And we feel really strongly that everything about our organization should speak to our discipleship of Jesus Christ. We've been very clear that we fully sustain the doctrines and leaders of the church, and that is absolutely true. And faith is a big part of what we do. So every Sunday we take the day completely off. We have a Sabbath devotional. We center ourselves on, the teachings of Jesus Christ, and ultimately, we feel like the measure of our discipleship needs to be in our actions, and that hopefully no one will see our name and write us off, that they'll actually look and see and know that we are sincere in that commitment.
And I'll just add, one thing that was very important to us is when I talked about that concept of total war and weaponizing institutions, religion has been weaponized significantly in politics in the last couple of decades. And interestingly enough, if you look at interviews of millennials, they are most disenfranchised with religion because of the way it has engaged in politics. And while we are completely committed to following President Nelson's request that we identify as disciples of Jesus Christ when identifying as religion, as co-religionists, it felt extraordinarily presumptuous to bring his name into our politics, whether they were nonpartisan or not. To lead with his name felt that we were claiming access to an authority or a sense of truth or purpose that we did not feel was appropriate, and we felt could actually do far more damage to religion than it would do to help it. Does that make sense? In other words, we are a very different beast than a church. And the women who belong to Mormon Women for Ethical Government, when they're going out and wearing that hat, they're wearing a very different hat than when they're identifying as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we didn't ever want those two things to be confused. And so that was really important to us. We didn't talk just amongst ourselves. Believe me, we talked to a lot of people. In fact, a lot of people who it was important to us that we felt that they were okay with this.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Annie. I am an anthropology and Arabic major. And my question was, how have you seen your organization's efforts affect directly federal and state policies? And what have been the biggest obstacles to that, whether that be your non-partisanship or your religious affiliation or something else?
So we're new and young, right?
Yeah.
So
a couple of things. We've met with many legislators from both federal and state offices, and one thing that the federal politicians keep telling us is keep talking, keep the dialogue open. So there's nothing that we can specifically point to and say we made that happen, but because of those relationships with their offices and those relationships with those men and women who work at the Capitol. We know that we are moving the needle in terms of creating more civic dialogue, and that it's working. It's keeping those lines of communication open. I would say our local efforts have been maybe a little more identifiable in terms of our impact.
Yeah.
So, and I know we're actually out of time. I'm getting a, a wave up here, but we are happy to step to the back and answer any other questions, or you tell us, what are we?
Yeah, maybe that's the best thing to do. Why don't we join with me in thanking our speakers very much for their presence and their work. We'll just invite you, if you do have questions, please come up and engage.